Welcome back to Radio Juxtapoz. My name's Doug Gillen. Today you join Evan, Pricco and myself in conversation with Bahamian LA-based interdisciplinary artist April Bey. Drawing on experience from Bahamian and American culture, April's work as both an artist and an educator critically explores themes of race, identity, supremacy, and colonialism.
That my dad told me when I was really young. I think I was a bit too young for him to explain all of the nuances of race. And so he was a huge sci-fi nerd. And so he decided to tell me the story that, well, we look differently because we're aliens from another planet. And nobody needs to know about that. It's just between you and I. We're supposed to observe and report on Earth. Reflections on the societal structures of life in post-colonial Bahamas are often found at the heart of April's work. A self-confessed blurred, that's a black nerd for those that don't know. Sci-fi becomes a vehicle to break away from the past and imagine new futures, creating the world April wants to see. In Atlantica, April reimagines every aspect of life, down to the very currency that is used. On Atlantica, we don't really differentiate between Caribbean blacks or African blacks or American blacks. It's more of a reimagining of like the idea and existence, or like the concept and feeling of being black, like the things that we like and that we're allowed to blow up in a space where it's not appropriated or monetized. It's just there for our enjoyment and our pleasure. The work itself takes multiple forms, though is always approached with a sharp sense of humour and a keen eye for design. Editorial-esque figures dressed in futuristic glitter and sequins will be submerged in a bed of colourful fur. Fashion models brandishing the text colonial swag make a strong advertising campaign for this decolonized utopia. Today, April joins us just off the back of her standout solo presentation with Tern Gallery at the Armory in New York for an interplanetary conversation that takes us completely out of this world. If this is your first time listening to Radio Juxtapoz, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe from wherever you're listening in from, and why not give us a follow on those socials. That's it from me. Let's get into it right here, right now. April Bey on Radio Juxtapoz.
She's a professor, so she's used to the early wake up sometimes, I assume, April.
Yeah, I'm up at 4:30 every morning.
Wait, what? Wait. Why?
Because I have to get the things I want to get done before I get to my classes. Okay. So it can be hard to make art when you spend 4 hours with other adults helping them make their art and making them feel special. You get home, you just want to relax and knock off and watch something. So that's usually when I get a lot of my practice in.
This is amazing, because does this mean that the artwork that you had at Armory was made at like 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning?
Well, not this past year because I was on sabbatical.
Okay. All right. I just want to know. I like to know what time of day the artwork I'm looking at is made, because it really helps clarify some things for me.
Yeah, usually I work 8 to noon or 8 to 3. But my do not disturb is on during that time. So it's like I don't really exist until 8 a.m. and then like all the notifications come through. I have a lot of friends in different time zones, obviously. Mm-hmm. So they don't stop. So it's not even that early you can be alone. So I'll be at the gym, and then my drive downtown, even downtown, I'm in the fashion district in Los Angeles, and it can be crunchy during the day. It's like people come to do studio visits. They often look like they've ran a marathon when they get up to my studio, because there's a lot of, biological hazards you have to circumvent to get up to my studio. But early in the morning is when they're doing the street cleaning. So it's clean and everybody's like, it's the morning time and there's like good smells. And yeah, so I try to get in and out.
Did someone teach you to be that disciplined with your own creative time? Or is it something that you just had to learn as all these opportunities and kind of career things have appeared for you?
So I was thinking about this the other day. It's 100% because I grew up in the Bahamas. But it's ironic because Bahamians don't have any concept of being tardy. Like once we're like functioning in the real world, but the way the school systems are set up, like we would physically be beaten if we were late. Like we had to show up to school on time. We have the British colonial system in there. So we had uniforms, we had houses, And we were inspected every morning. And so that's where it started. Like my family, like pushing me out the door early. So I got to school on time so that I could rectify any uniform issues. But then like culturally, we don't show up on time for anything. Like none of my friends, it's like we lose it after we're out of an institution. But I haven't, because I don't have enough time. Like I don't have time to sleep in and not do anything with that whole part of the day. And I get enough sleep. So why not use that time?
What do you think happens between the institution and then the not institution if you're going to take a swing?
I think that we have a bigger fear of the institution that really doesn't really do anything for us versus the people we love and care about in our life. I think that's down to it. Like if it's not money that we're getting or something that we're getting out of it, if it's just being on time for a friend's opening or being on time for a dinner party, then we can take our time and it's island time. But, I think when it's about going to school and embarrassing your legacy or getting kicked out or getting shamed in front of your peers, and also culturally, we don't shame each other for being late. It's like when I have a dinner party, I already know to tell certain people to be there 2 hours before it starts, or my chicken's gonna run or something. Like they don't, my friends typically don't understand, like, oh, the meal has different sections to it that, needs to be warm and we all need to be together. So I have to taper that as well. And I just accept it. And I'm like, oh my God, when we were in school, we were so afraid of being late for assembly.
Can you tell me what the culture shock might have been from going from the Bahamas to Ball State University in Indiana?
I always start off by talking about casseroles. The food was like a big shock because meat wise, eating beef was like a treat in the Bahamas, whereas like in the US, it's like everywhere. Like fast food was a treat. We used to go to Wendy's for our birthday, and that was like, oh my God, we went to Wendy's. So casseroles, like I had a sleepover with someone from school, and it was like a big deal because I was like, I'm having a sleepover in the US. Oh. And the night before, her mom was like, oh, we're going to have biscuits and gravy for breakfast. And the whole night I couldn't sleep because I was so scared. And I was like, I don't understand what that is, because my understanding of biscuits and gravy is, biscuits are cookies.
You had the British biscuit. Okay, cool.
Gravy is like oxtail gravy, like,
Right.
And so I was like, I don't understand how that is. Like, how am I going to approach this? Like, how am I going to do this? And so then when I actually saw what it was in the morning, it was still a bit shocking to me because I was like, why is there white, creamy, meaty? And the biscuit that they were presenting to me was more of like a scone without like sugar. It was just very confusing. The food was very confusing to me. Casseroles were abysmal to me. Like I was just like, I don't understand what's inside of this. Like, how do you know what's inside of this? The food was white. And when I say white, I mean in color.
Yeah.
So I grew up eating colorful things. Even the fish were colorful. And so it was just a lot of like, basic food. So for me, it was food because in the Bahamas, my first job was working in a family restaurant. So I grew up being forced to cook for tourists. I now very much enjoy cooking, but that was what the biggest shock for me. That and everybody thinking I was Jamaican because, that's the biggest. That's the thing that people relate to the Caribbean.
They took a swing. That is probably Jamaican.
Yeah. So that was the biggest shock. And, people being like, I was a child when I moved to the US, and people would be like, why did you leave paradise? Oh, I would never leave. I was like, because I had all the freedom in the world to make this decision. How
quickly did you sort of settle in then? Was Indiana, did it feel quite comfortable?
No, I mean, the climate was a shock. I really, really hated the winters. When I first moved to the US, I thought it was such a flex to have a school bus. Because in the Bahamas, you just walk to school, and I was like, I get to ride on the school buses I saw on TV. But then waiting for that bus when it was like 30 degrees out and not really understanding how to properly dress for the cold and just trying to figure it out. And not knowing how to dress in general, because in the Bahamas, we wear uniforms. I would never see my friends out of uniform unless it was summer, or on the weekends. And so like now all of a sudden I had to learn how to dress, like wear regular clothes every day and not just for special occasions. And in college, it got to be a little bit more comfortable because I had more access to different types of people, like different types of Black people and like exchange students. I purposefully chose the international dorms. So I didn't have to go home during the breaks, but also to meet everybody from the different countries and stuff. So I think that's when I started getting comfortable, but that's also when I started being a little bit more educated and then started feeling uncomfortable because now I was understanding like all of the language that had been around me when I moved to the Midwest from the Bahamas.
Trust us, we will talk about art at some point. I was thinking when you were talking about that, like you had to wear a uniform in the Bahamas and just the different kind of climate, the different approach to going to school, all those things. What was like your first cherished piece of clothing or something that was like yours and that kind of defined your identity as you came to America and all of a sudden you could wear your own clothes to school? Like what was like that first thing, that first kind of like that you were so happy that you had?
Well, it was a pair of pants. So one of the things that prompted us to move to the US is that we had a house fire. And like everything was destroyed. And the plan was already to send me to the US to go to school because I didn't test very high at anything in the Bahamas, math or banking or anything or tourist related. And so when that happened, the pair of pants that I had on that day was the only clothes that I had left. They were a pair of pants that I had just bought in the US because, we go to Miami to get some cheap stuff and we bring it back to the Bahamas. And I had just gotten those pants and they were really, I think they're ugly now, but back then they were so dope. And they were jean bell-bottom pants.
Hell yeah.
Different finishes of jean every like 6 inches with fringe at each like connection. Definitely giving Spice Girls. I was obsessed with them. And so I still have those pants. Like I wore them in the US to school. And I remember like when I wore them, this African-American student, and at the time I was trying to learn like African-American slang. And they were like, oh, those pants are so tight. And I was like, oh, no, they're not. I mean, yeah, they are. And they're like, no, I mean, they're good. They're good. They're good. I was like, okay, thanks. And those pair of pants, like apart from being all that I had left of like my life in the Bahamas, they were dope here in the US too. And I was like, okay, these are cool. So like, and I still have those pants. I still have those pants.
Did I not read somewhere that Harry Potter was banned?
Mm-hmm. Craft. It's evil.
How come, first of all, Harry Potter was banned? And then following on from that, do you remember what your first piece of sort of art of some kind that you fell in love with?
Well, you just brought that up. You just answered it for me. Like,
oh shit.
Well, so in the Bahamas, at least for me growing up, we could only afford the one local channel, ZNS, and that channel would often show older shows. So I grew up with like these shows that I guess played on Nick at Night. They would play on ZNS, and so for me, books were the only way for me to understand like young adults in other cultures. And Harry Potter was one of the Babysitters Club, obviously. But it was Harry Potter that we would smuggle in through the US because the movies weren't allowed in the Bahamas either. Because it's witchcraft and the Bahamas is a Christian nation.
The witchcraft part. Because I was trying to figure out why it was banned, and the witchcraft. That's
a Christian nation, and I was obsessed with Harry Potter because like any story at that time that gave me an adventure escape, like you now have discovered that you are exceptional when your whole life you've been told you aren't, and now you get to escape the little rock that you've grown up on. And for me it was like I want to live in the States. And then also like their boarding school lifestyle I was obsessed with because we were pretty much like that in the Bahamas, but we didn't live, and that was something I was obsessed with. I was like, I want to go away and live in a castle and be in houses and like wear uniforms instead of just being hot and miserable and having to walk 2 miles to go to school. And so, yeah, like a lot of British young adult fiction I read and R.L. Stine. It was mostly books. And to this day, I still have a very rigorous reading practice.
So does that sort of that part of your childhood, that part of your cultural and kind of social awakening, does that still play into the art that you're making now?
Absolutely. You saw.
Sure seems like it. Yeah.
Yeah, because the reason reading is my favorite medium of consumption, or listening to podcasts and storytelling, is because my brain can shape things the way I want to see it. You can describe the race or whatever of the character all you want, but I'm still going to see Hermione with a big afro. And that's how I've always seen Hermione reading the character. That invitation for me to add my own creativity is the reason why I like that format. And so that's what I try to bring into my work as well, is you seeing how my planet is from the inside of my head and seeing if you can position yourself within that.
What I really liked about your presentation, especially at the Armory Show, and I'd love to hear your take on this, was that you didn't just see like, okay, I've got a booth and I'm going to hang some artwork. You're like, you're going to come into my universe, and I really appreciate that. And obviously it was one of my favorite booths at the fair. You knew that you were going into a place where everyone's booth was kind of look the same because of the nature of an art fair, but you came in and it was like, this is my solo show. I'm turning this into my show. Is that kind of the experience that you always want people to have with your work?
Oh, yes. And it irritates people so bad because curators contact me and they're like, I have a group show. And I'm like, okay, so here's what it's like working with me. I send like detailed PDFs with like how to install the work, what color, because every piece I make is designed with a background behind it. And there are rules, it's rule based. So if they're the shiny pieces, they always get a disrupted textured background, whether it's satin, velvet, or fur. And the other works always get a painted background. And that has a lot to do with how we design our neighborhoods in the Bahamas as well. And like everything in the Bahamas has a design element to it. So this year after the hurricane, if my house was teal and my neighbor wants to paint their house teal, maybe I paint mine canary yellow. And that's something that in my neighborhood was constructed and orchestrated. When my gallery was like, yeah, we'll do a solo presentation of your work, I was like, okay, well, we have to put it on. We have to put it on because like it's my Bahamian gallery too. So I'm like, we can't sit small. So, and that's how all of the works are. Like the first thing I do before I agree to do a show is I ask for the floor plan with wall heights. And I try to figure out like, okay, how can my work fit in this space? How's it going to be seen? And even if it's a corner, I want to try to change it so people get a moment of respite from this earth.
Oh, amazing. Love it.
Where do you think your first inspiration then came from, sort of that visual side of aesthetics? You know, because if you're reading books and everything like that, it's kind of like you're building these words with words, these worlds with words. And then if you look at something like designing these, you know, huge immersive installations and spaces, there's obviously got to be a lot of aesthetics that are, you know, elements that are being pulled in there. So where was your first biggest visual love?
Junkanoo, 100% Junkanoo. It's a parade performance competition that happens in the Bahamas for Christmas and New Year's. It's something that, like, as a child, I went for the first time in a long time this last New Year's because it had been shut down for COVID. And also I just haven't gone in a long time because it was one of those things that you go to as a child. But when I went this time, one of the things I realized is how small I was when I was a kid, being immersed in that and like walking through it. And my memories of it up until I went this last year was giant costumes with feathers and fur and glitter and sequins. And the dancing is a part of the competition. So is the music and the presentation of the costumes. That's probably the biggest influence. Like, I think I fought that for a very long time in grad school. I was like, no, I just have a background in design, which I do. I do have a background in design. That's what I teach. But if I'm being honest, my attraction to design obviously comes from Junkanoo. Junkanoo is like an organically designed production. Seeing it recently this new year really put that into perspective for me. Like, the craftsmanship that goes behind creating the costumes is very similar to what I do in my practice. And then I'm examining the school system again as well, and how our standardized tests which are named the same as they are in the UK, we have a big category that tests home ec. We call it home ec, but it's something that I say forced, but because according to the US school system, a lot of students don't see cooking or sewing throughout their whole education, whereas in the Bahamas, we're tested on it before we can progress. And so my sewing projects, I didn't do very well on, because I was always trying to sneak in something creative. Like we had to make a lab coat, and that was it to pass the test. And my lab coat was functional. There was one arm longer than the other, but I would have passed if I didn't also spend 6 hours, box stitching a teddy bear on the pocket, because I wanted to add a little extra oomph. And so that's kind of also the aesthetic of Atlantica. It's very flamboyant. It's very gay. It's very extra. Like glitter is our currency. And so that's why glitter is in everything, because we don't have poverty, because glitter does get into everything. So you simply just need to sit down and shake your hair out, and that's how you pay for things on Atlantica.
Can you just, for context, give us a little bit of give us an idea of this this world that you've crafted here?
Yeah, so
I'm sure this is the first time you've done this, but it's important that you do it rather than we do it.
Yeah, and it's nice because you're a professor, so this is like you're teaching us right now. This is good.
So, and I have different ways of explaining it that don't bore me, because I do get bored.
I can reframe the question if you want into something else.
No, because people need to know about it. The origin story comes from my dad. It was his way of explaining racism to a child that was way too young to understand it. And obviously to a young father who didn't prepare to have that talk. So he told me that we looked differently because we were both aliens from another planet. Specifically, I wanted to understand why my features looked more like his and what those features meant, because it didn't look like everybody else's features. Why is our nose laid out this way? Why does my hair go up instead of hang down? And so he literally was describing those features as alien, but we're better. Like, we're great aliens, and we're here to observe and report on Earth. And we can't tell anyone. It's a secret. Our magic is a secret. And I think that I walked away with that as being a positive. So that's the origin story of Atlantica. And the stories that are now being developed and coming out in my work are reactions to being on Earth. Like, my friends and I talk about Atlantica in everyday context, like when we get frustrated with not having that one dish that we traveled to that one restaurant to have that we had last year, and then they're out of it, we'll be like, oh, on Atlantica, this wouldn't even happen. They would have already had this prepared for us. Or if we're going somewhere in LA, my friend in the backseat will be like, on Atlantica, you can just call ahead and the spot would be ready. And so now it's forming this like online community where people are showing up also for my public photo shoots as being like, I've lived in Atlantican, I'm ready to go, let me do this. And that's kind of where it's going now.
So this is, if it's not embedded in or related, reflective of, or adjacent to, it's one of them, Afrofuturism.
Yeah, I like to say speculative futurism now, because Afrofuturism focuses on African Americans and African futurism focuses on Africans' concerns. And then, I'm kind of in between, also from the Caribbean. So speculative futurism kind of captures the diaspora there.
Did have a question off the back of that, but that just threw me.
Those three categories threw you?
Looking back, how do you feel about things like the language of being referred to as aliens? Has that ever been kind of problematic?
No, because you have to meet my dad, which a lot of people in the art world are starting to meet him. He's goofy. He's goofy like I am. And to us, aliens are the best thing ever. Like, we're really into Star Trek. Most of the stories he told me, I only learned in college were 80s sci-fi movie plots, because other students had it on while we were working. And I was like, wait a minute. They're like, yeah, this movie's been around. Like, our favorite movie is Enemy Mine. Have either of you seen that?
Enemy Mine? No.
Enemy Mine. It's a very underrated 80s sci-fi movie. Okay. And it's about like humans discovering and colonizing space and then running into another alien race that's kind of doing that too. But because they can't communicate, they form a war. And the movie centers around one of the soldiers getting crashed on this planet with another of the alien soldiers, and they're forced to live there for many years, and they fall in love.
Don't you understand English, toad face? I don't love you and you don't love me. We're stranded here, you understand?
It has a lot of commentary on gender, right? Because you don't really know, like, the gender of the alien is it fluctuates throughout the movie. It's a brilliant movie, but like, growing up, to me, aliens were always something to aspire to, because in a lot of our fiction about aliens, they're always better than us in some way. Like, they're coming down to us, and they're coming to either destroy us because we're not worthy, or they're coming to take over us because they need something from us that isn't as great as what they have, but is a key ingredient to what they need. And so that has been something I've thought about. But also, like, the word alien is used as a combative term against people who cross borders. And trying to decolonize the word alien and reclaim it. Like, there's nothing wrong with the alienness or an attempt at assimilation. These people aren't aliens. They're human beings. And I'm trying to humanize that word as well. And also, it's coming from blurred culture. And blurred culture, nerd culture, aliens really aren't seen as being a negative. It's seen as something that we obsess over and that we cosplay and that we're interested in.
Amazingly, like, that film sounds like one of the more, like, a quite progressive film for the time.
You should watch it. It's one of my favorite films.
My life. Why? I need to look at another face, even as ugly as yours.
You obviously went down the academic side. How much of your driving factor was a thirst for academia versus this, desire to be a visual artist?
So I started off as art education, but that was more from pressure from my family, who was like, "Oh no, you're gonna be broke. Like, be a teacher or do graphic design." Halfway through the program, I had issues with how the school system was set up, and I knew I would be a problem if I tried to, like, put myself in there.
Before you gloss over that, can you stay in that and maybe unpack a little bit of what you mean by that there?
And how you apply what you believe art education should be now that you're a professor.
When you do art ed, you're looking at K through 12, and I didn't want to be in that system of, like, that type of administration, the rules that you have to follow to be a teacher. There's not a lot of freedom for pedagogy. There's not a lot of freedom for anything, really. And that's, once I observed my first class and saw how it was just like a overglorified kindergarten or babysitting, it didn't meet my intellectual needs. And also, I would have been fighting with everybody. Like, I didn't agree with any of the rules. I didn't agree with any of the laws, the funding, anything. So I didn't want to put myself in a system where I couldn't change it in the time that I wanted to.
That system needs the people that are going to be combative and start to push it so that it goes. Do you believe in incremental change, or does it need to be radically rehauled?
So James Baldwin talks about this in an interview where the interviewer says, it's going to take time. And he was like, but it's taken my grandfather's time, my brother's time, my sister's time, my cousin and my niece's time. How much time do you need for your progress?
What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
I used to be like that when I first started academia as a professor, but now that I've sat on the committees and I see what it's really like, the system is too big to change with just yourself or even a handful of people, because it'll kill you and break you before it changes.
Designed to break that part of you.
Exactly.
Wow.
So I put my attention into my students, who I know will be my generation, and the generation below me aren't going to carry on with this. So it's a waiting game. It is a waiting game.
Give us a ray of hope on that.
The students, like, when I first started teaching and I was frustrated with the administration part, I went to one of my educational mentors, Todd Gray. And he's also an artist, and everybody should know. And he was like, don't worry about them. The only thing you need to worry about are your students. Are your evaluations good? I was like, yes, they love me. He's like, will they go anywhere with you and do anything with you? And I'm like, yes. And he's like, that's it. That's your power. They will change the school. And he's true. Like a lot of the change that we've had at my school is because the students, led by me, demanded the change. And so now we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee where we never had one before. And now we're trying to get spaces for Black students to congregate safely, things like that. Because at the end of the day, it's the bottom line. And if the students are our clients and they say they want changes, then I just tell the students, put those changes on the evaluation.
Speaking like an American now.
Yeah, that was good. I like that. April, I also think what's really important in what you're saying is, and I was thinking about this morning, is that for your students, for students in general, to have a professor who is also a practicing and showing artist, there is this connection between you showing people that not only is it possible, but also find space for yourself to do these things while also having a career in academia. Like there's so many things that you're doing that is setting a great example that's also like, I think so powerful that you still have your own practice, you're showing work, you are like making it as an artist, and you're also teaching. Like that is something that's like inspiring for your students.
Yeah, success is the best revenge.
It fucking is, isn't it?
So I need to be like transparent here and say that the reason why I've been so aggressive with my career is because when I got the teaching gig, a lot of people in my life were like, oh, you're not going to stop making art. I lost friends over this because they were like, you're not going to make art anymore. Only people who teach, they don't do, or whatever. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I can't do art on my own without steady income. And I have a disability. I need insurance. I'm being practical. And I'm so grateful I went that route because there's been some really shady art world things that if I didn't have a job to say, no, I'm good, thank you, I would have lost art. The career side wouldn't have done as well. And I'm grateful for that. But like at the same time, I really like to succeed to prove people wrong. And that's the best revenge.
But I think also, do you find it the fact that you're around people who are trying to learn, it keeps you in a learned sort of atmosphere and informs your work? Like, are these things informing each other?
Absolutely. And after taking a year off from teaching, I learned a really big lesson that I need to teach to keep the balance, because there are things in the art world, putting myself into it 100%, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm getting stupider, because there are simple concepts that my students get, like respecting my boundaries because I have a syllabus, emailing me during work time only, responding to my emails in a professional way because they want to impress the professor, and there's like an academic and intellectual stamina, even with my colleagues, my colleagues, that we're not competing against each other. We're sharing things with each other, really nerdy, dorky stuff. And so that's what I need to stay balanced, because the art world, like having people ask me the same question over and over because they don't like my answer is so infuriating. And it's now my 18, 19-year-old students is the standard I'm using when I deal with my studio. I made a syllabus for my studio, and I was like, listen, if you can't meet the minimum requirements of an 18 or 19-year-old who's going to be an art student, then we can't work together, because I'm getting more respect from them than I am from someone who wants to take 50%.
Because we are juxtaposed and we don't necessarily have to abide by the rules of certain publications in the art world. What was like your first, like, wait a minute, what is this moment dealing with the art world where it felt like, I really don't know how else to ask that question without this doesn't seem quite, I'm not sure about this. If you're allowed to talk about it, and you can call out anybody if you want. We're fine with it.
I'm not going to name names because I'm respectful. And honestly, every time I end relationships, I leave it better than I found it. Like people I don't work with, they still ask about me. We're still on good terms. But it's the whole, like, you can create something, pay for all the raw materials and labor up front, and just be making it wild in the woods. And someone can come up and be like, hey, I want 50% of that. Also, I might give a discount to someone and you have to take 50% of that. And then also, when I get the money, I'm going to have it to play with for 30 days before I give you the money. And so there was a moment where like a museum had acquired a piece and it was registered and had a number and everything and was on the website, and they were calling me to do an interview about it on the local news, and I hadn't been paid. So to me, being on the spectrum sometimes, the way I visualize things in my head, that sale doesn't exist because it hasn't been completed. So how are you like those that is like, I've had many gallerists be patient with me and explain why things have to be the way they are. But to me, it is just so flabbergasting that an artwork could be with someone who paid for it and the person who made it is still without money. And there's also this weirdness of artists not being honest with each other and telling them. I've had galleries approach me that knew they were being sued by other artists for $500,000 and were about to go under. But they're aggressively meeting with artists to sign them. And the other artists in the roster haven't been paid for years. And when I ask them, how are things at the gallery? Oh, it's probably fine. Then the articles come out and then they're like, yeah, it's been a problem for years. And I'm like, well, why aren't you telling the new artist this?
Why are you watching me sign my contract? Like,
you want us to come in and do a solo show to pay for your show that you haven't been paid for. It's things like that because, you know, I did grow up on a small island, and the gallery that represents me that you saw at the Armory, like we run differently because a lot of us have been working together for many, many years. Amanda encountered me as a student. So she's probably one of the few people who've seen my work go from, oh my goodness, to where it's at now. We can have these discussions with each other and I feel safe there. But so far, my experience working with US galleries and even European galleries, because European galleries are trying to start this thing now where they have white male directors who are hiring, you know, Black women curators to scoop in all of the Black artists, but the programming isn't equitable. You know, like they're still trying to slip in, oh, you can pay for shipping. In what world do you see me doing my thing in the wild as a pre-existing condition, and you're just gonna like Van Damme yourself into my studio and say, hey, I'd like 50%, you pay for shipping? That's when I act like a real alien.
That was a good European reference as well.
By the way, I do want to shout out your gallery because Jody from Tern treated me and my girlfriend as if we were actual like interested art patrons and didn't like look at us in our not fancy clothes and kind of treat us like we weren't going to buy anything. She was so nice. So shout out to Tern and Jody. She was amazing.
Yep. One aspect of April's practice we weren't really able to fully touch on was the historical prejudice that surrounds black hair and the millennial natural hair movement. If you do get a chance, I really recommend jumping into one of her talks that you can find online.
Reading about hair relaxers when they were first given to the market, so to speak, or invented, with the target audience being Black men immigrating or assimilating into white working culture, right? So relaxing your hair brings you a little bit closer to the Eurocentric ideal of beauty, places you into the respectable aesthetic of being able to work alongside white people.
But obviously, don't do that right now because we've still got loads more to come in the second half with April Bey right here on Radio Juxtapoz. Where do you think this, I guess the best way for me to rephrase it, where did you learn to know your worth as well as you know? I've sat here in the same position talking with artists, and I don't think many of them are aware of their worth as I'm getting from you.
Absolutely. Great question.
A lot of falling over on my face and like getting through opportunities and then sitting up and being like, oh no, they took advantage of me. I get my heart broken a lot. So I'm in Los Angeles, and the one thing that everybody asks me is like, oh, how do you like living there? With this look on their face, like they smelled something off. And then I'll have to be honest with them and say that like it's difficult to form genuine relationships here because it's so transactional and Hollywood.
Yes.
And so people are so good at performing closeness of a friendship. You become friends with them. And then when after a certain period of time, they haven't achieved what they thought they were going to achieve by being in your proximity. I've had people just straight up say, after I've told them no, okay, well, I was only in this to like get this to use your house as an Airbnb. So, yeah, I don't want to be your friend anymore. And that's like the worst thing ever. So it's like I've stumbled through a lot of those things. But then also, again, because I have a job, that over the years has shown me what I'm worth. So I used to do artist talks for like $150. But now that I'm a lecturer, I know what that entails, like to sit down and put a presentation together that's going to work on any computer, because you don't know what computer they're going to have. And then to actually give that presentation for an hour and then do 30 to 45 minutes of Q&A afterwards, the time to commute. People were asking me to do talks where the commute was an hour and a half both ways, and they're paying $150. And so I started paying taxes. I have 2 assistants, they're employees now, and I'm now paying all of those taxes. And so I know I can tell you exactly how much my time is worth an hour now, based on how much it cost me to not be in the studio drafting and sewing and laying stuff out. And so once I calculated that, I realized that a lot of these opportunities were philanthropic. And so I started categorizing them as such. And so when people ask me to do these talks, I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't afford to donate my time, or I can't afford to do this. And usually they'll follow up and be like, oh, we're paying you $150. Like, yes, but unfortunately, when you count in, the small business tax and like all the taxes and all this other stuff, that actually ends up costing me about $1,200 to do this talk. And then I also send them an average of how much I've been paid before, because it's not like I'm just floating through life. I actually have numbers of what people have paid me. And it's like, if they're willing to pay me this much, how do you expect me to come down to you? And I have rules. If it's a Black-owned nonprofit that's serving my community, then I'll do it. But that's philanthropic. And I have a quota because, we can't be everywhere all the time. And that's how I've learned. I've made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of people who are probably listening right now know they took advantage of me, and that's okay. That's fine. I move on. But those experiences are the ones that teach me, oh, okay, that was wrong, so I'm not going to do that anymore.
I like that. That's strong as fuck. Are you going to invoice us after?
Is this part of your philanthropic quota?
This is part of a solo show with Tern.
Why do you make art?
It's really, 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 really fun. It's enjoyable. I like tightening my thread. I like buying needles. I like going shopping for fur. I like people touching the fur when they go to my shows. And I like seeing little Black girls smile. And I like to see all people from all backgrounds coming and giggling and like taking selfies. And I like traveling to meet new people because of my work. I like making work because it keeps me alive. And it also prevents me from being a serial killer, I think.
So it keeps other people alive as well.
It does.
Talk about not mutually exclusive or mutually exclusive. I'm not sure. It's amazing how gone about 125 episodes and we've never asked that question before. And also I think I'm going to ask this too, simply, what is your art?
What is my art? It's a changeling. Yeah, it's always ever evolving. And Lord help us if it ever stagnates. So I think I look at it as a changeling.
Is there a particular piece or exhibition or moment that you hold in slightly closer to your heart or in higher regard than others?
So my first museum solo show, Atlantica, the Gilda region, that was it for me because it was the first time my art illustrated to me how far it could go by introducing me to one of my favorite authors, and the museum organized a panel talk with us, but they also had to organize a meeting before because I'm a horrible fangirl. It's not something I'm ever going to get over in my life or get normal about. If I meet somebody whose work I deeply respect and I like, it's over. And so I was like, we're going to have to meet first because I can't do an event with her. And when we met, it was just everything I imagined. And I've just recently been meeting some of my favorite authors that I had no idea I would even get to meet. And I'm just like, I know what's inside of your head. I've read all of your words. I'm obsessed with you. And that show got me to realize that all of these books I've been sneaking and reading and obsessed with for years, the author lives in the same state as me and invited me to have coffee. And we both like Star Trek. And that's something I never would have known if I didn't make my work about it.
Okay, so art has made you not a serial killer, that's great. It's also affording you the opportunity to meet people that you want to meet. But who are some artists that you look to for both inspiration, influence, or just even you would like to meet and have a conversation or a coffee with who's making work right now?
The list is long, but I would say definitely Diedrich Brackens is one of my all-time favorite artists.
So good.
Robert Pruitt, a sculptor that I really, and I'm naming sculptors because I don't typically like sculptures. So the sculptors I'm naming are really good. Kim Dakers, who makes sculptures out of tires.
She's great.
And we have a collaboration that we're working on right now. Jeffrey Maris is also one of my favorite sculptors. Yeah, there's a lot. I usually have a list that I have for my students, but those are the artists that I return to frequently.
I didn't have a good way of segueing this in at all. I read about your lecture, Pretty Hurts. I've seen it in like 5 different articles, and it was described as a controversial talk on Beyonce and faux feminism. But I couldn't figure out what made it controversial. And having talked with you, I really, really want to know what made that so juicy.
Well, I'm a huge Beyonce fan. And at the time, she was coming off of her album that was all about feminism. And she was being attacked in the news because that was the time where we were starting to differentiate between Western feminism or white feminism versus womanism. So analyzing Beyonce through the lens of feminism, which is very westernized, is problematic because her target audience is not white women, and the privileges between the two are different. So the class was analyzing process-based art and feminism, but through the lens of Black women. And so the controversial part was, at first, I think MTV or the Huffington Post picked up the class because the school I was teaching at, there aren't Black women teaching there. You have Dana Walker, who is head of the Art Center. It used to be called Art Center at Night program. But at the time when I was there, I was also less than a year out of grad school. So that was the controversial part, that I was writing a class at this corporate art school.
Less than a year?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was assumed that it was a non-person of color teaching the class. So that was why the press got upset, because the school had that history. And so then the school internally was like, we want to write a press release and out you as the professor. And I was like, but we don't have to do that. Like, I am the professor, so let me just teach the class. We don't have to respond. But nervous and didn't want Beyonce to sue or anything. And so they put out a press release like saying, April, look, she's the one teaching it. And the class was also controversial because there were a lot of white female students who felt that it was problematic to teach a class focusing on Black women, and that was like against what feminism was about. And the point of the class was to show that there are gaps in feminism, and it focused on global feminism. And at the end of the semester, all of those students messaged me to apologize and wish they could have taken the class, because it was kind of branded in a provocative way. But at the end of the day, that's what we were exploring. And so, now, Beyonce, I'm in Beyonce's collection.
That's amazing.
That must have been a pretty cool moment.
I almost died.
Go on, tell us.
It was at a public gala. I didn't know who bid on my work. And so I had to wait until the whole thing was over to go to like the section where the artists have to go to release their work. And I was like, can I see who bought my work? And then she was like, oh, Beyonce, Knowles Carter. And I was like, what? And everybody heard. And they were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I was like, that's super cool. And then her mom also is opening an art gallery here in North Hollywood that I've been working with. And so her show is moving to Atlanta.
It just seems like weird to be upset about. I don't understand. Well, all right.
No, think about where we're at now, though. Now, that's weird. But then we didn't have any of that language. Like I think even Art Center, the diversity committee, that was the first year that I had formed.
How far back are we going here?
2015.
8-9 years now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you, like, what are you reading right now?
I'm reading 2 books. I'm rereading Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James, who I just met at the Armory. Oh, I'm reading The Secret Garden.
Wow.
Whoa.
I have a show coming up in Garden Space here in LA, and it reminded me that this was one of my favorite books, so I should go back and reread it.
It's a beautiful book.
That's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you going to be, is this kind of like to try and help build your world, or just purely for pleasure?
Yeah, this is for pleasure. I'm reading nonfiction as well. And that's like set boundaries, find peace, to help me with communication. And now that I'm back at school, juggling both.
Are you going to be juggling both those balls for a while?
I haven't.
Leaning towards one ball.
Respectful exit strategy that I'm working up to. Like, there's some pedagogical research that I started over sabbatical that I want to see in my classes, which is more of a hybrid model. During the pandemic, what I learned, to my detriment, is that my classes weren't very accessible when they were in person. It's difficult for all students to see demonstrations. The class is not accessible to wheelchair users either. And that became a problem for me. And so I'm trying to redesign my courses so that a bulk of that detailed demonstration material and teaching is online in high def video format, so that students who can't come physically to class can also participate online. And so I want to see about a year or two of that in practice, and then probably will decrease my teaching load significantly while keeping my credentials, because I did work hard to be tenured. So I'm not going to give up that title. But
yeah, absolutely.
Teach full time to be tenured. So I would drop down to being part-time, I think, with an early retirement track.
Is there any other, I know that so many of the things that you're reading in your research start to materialize. Is there anything that you're sort of, any paths that you're looking to explore a little bit at the moment? Anything that looks like it might be appearing in the future in a forthcoming body of work?
Yes, gods and deities. So I'm now constructing gods and deities on Atlantica, and I'm reading a whole bunch of books by N.K. Jemisin, who's also one of my favorite authors, and I can't wait to meet her. Where she does a lot of her writing and world building includes gods just walking amongst us and having their own issues and like interfering with humanity and like being obsessed with humanity. A lot of my work, a theme in the work, is the fact that even though I feel like an alien and I'm foreign, I still can't let go of humanity. I'm still in love with humanity and the beautiful aspects of it. And so that's what I'm working on now, reading, rereading a lot of Neil Gaiman, watching American Gods, and the narrative and idea of like these ancient gods coming to be contemporary and living amongst us, and like how we deal with them disrupting our daily commute because they're having a bad day and they decide to make it rain, hailfire, and like it's things like that I'm interested in now. That's probably going to come out in the next body of work.
I like that. Gods existing in the mundanity of a daily commute is quite a beautiful image. Geographically, historically, where would these gods have been initially birthed?
I'm looking at them from all over. I wanted to go to Ethiopia and Armenia to do some research on like those two countries have the oldest, most ancient form of Christianity. And Ethiopia has some Black Madonnas. I've seen the Black Madonna in Spain. What I like to do is put it all together. So you know how like Beyonce samples and she curates an album with different artists. That's how I like to come up with these deities, because I want them to look ancient, but also futuristic. I want them to be recognizable, but also different. So I have to understand, I'm following my interest in the different forms. Like Christianity isn't obvious because of what I was indoctrinated into growing up in the Bahamas. But I'm interested to see how that translates in Africa and also Armenia, which is a big part of the population of where I live here in LA, and also my student body.
Do you practice a religion?
I consider myself interfaith, and religion makes my gums itch. I prefer spirituality opposed to like anything related to an institution.
It's the institutional part, right?
It is.
Right.
It is.
You can't shake that history.
Right.
It's like,
I just want to go back to the serial killer chat. It's where I'm sort of still at a moment of where I'm really happy you chose art.
Yeah, because I would be really good at it. You know Mike Kelly?
Yes.
He had an installation at MoCA while I was in grad school. This is where I got that idea from. I can't remember the name of the piece, but I'll describe the installation. It's a hallway of all of these drawings from inmates in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And the piece, like,
I remember this piece. Yep.
it's eerie because the drawings are good. They're good. And there's like a lot of history of like serial killers being good at drawing. And as someone who majored in drawing, and I teach drawing and I write about it a lot, it's actually a skill that isn't natural to a lot of people. And so to have that skill, it's a side of the brain that we all possess. I think the argument he was making is like, what would happen if these individuals had an outlet to pursue their artistic and creative endeavors? Or did they pursue it in this way instead?
There was a really beautiful show at the Drawing Center here in New York about art made while incarcerated. And it was so, like one of the best shows I've ever seen. And I think it was kind of the same conversation being had and probably inspired by Mike Kelly's installation. So there's a fine line. April, I just think that the work that you're making is, personally for Doug and I, some of the favorite art that we've seen in the last couple of years, especially since we started the podcast. So it's just like so nice to have you on and giving us your time from the West Coast and letting the UK and Eastern time work for you. So thank you.
That's it from Evan and myself. Thanks again to April for being so generous with her time, and I can confirm up until this point she hasn't yet dropped us an invoice. We might have actually done something right there. We'll be back with you very soon. Till that moment comes, take care of yourselves and each other.